Please, please don't leave us. The bad lady is coming for us. The words were a trembling ghost of a sound, but they hit Kang Joon-Hyuk harder than any assassination attempt ever had. She said, we have dirty blood. He stopped mid-sip, the expensive amber liquid in his glass catching the light of the luxury restaurant. His eyes, sharp and predatory, didn't move, but his heart, an organ he had kept under lock and key for 6 long empty years, gave a sudden violent thud. He felt them before he saw them. 2 small, shivering bodies slid into the booth beside him. On his left and right, 2 identical 5-year-old girls with beautiful, neatly braided cornrows huddled against his tailored Italian suit. Their tiny hands gripped his sleeves as if he were the only solid thing in a world trying to drown them. One twin looked at the door with sheer terror, while the other leaned into his ear, her tears dampening his collar. Joon-Hyuk turned his head slowly, and that's when the scent hit him like a physical blow. Jasmine and rain. It was the exact, haunting fragrance of Amara Cole, the woman who had vanished from his life 6 years ago without a trace, leaving nothing behind but a scorched apartment and a hole in his soul. He looked into the twins' wide, dark eyes, and that moment when he realizes the girls might be his daughters. They weren't just strangers. They were the piece of himself he never knew was missing. But before we see exactly what happens when those men reach the table, and how far Joon-Hyuk is willing to go to protect these 2 little girls, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching this story from tonight? Drop your city and country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. And if you're already hoping Joon-Hyuk protects Nia and Zuri, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, the men are only a few steps away. The twins are holding their breath. And the Dragon of Seoul is about to remind them why his enemies fear his name. The restaurant's heavy doors swung open, and 3 men in slate-gray coats stepped in. Joon-Hyuk's eyes slowly lifted toward the door. The Dragon of Seoul had just realized something terrifying. For the first time in his life, he had something to lose. They didn't look like common thugs. They moved with the professional posture of cleaners. The kind of men Joon-Hyuk's mother or his obsessive ex, Yoon Seo-yeon, would hire to make mistakes disappear forever. "Daddy, there you are." The twin on his right cried out, her voice high and forced, a desperate gamble for survival. She buried her face in his arm. "Please," she whispered under her breath, so low only a father could hear. "They said we don't belong here. They said we have dirty blood. Please, just for a minute, save us." The lead hunter's footsteps were measured, heavy with the arrogance of a man who believed he held all the cards. He stopped exactly 3 feet from the table, his slate-gray coat still glistening with droplets of the soul rain. He didn't look at Joon-Hyuk with respect or even caution. He looked at him as an obstacle, a civilian who had accidentally stumbled into a professional's workspace. To this man, the 2 5-year-old girls trembling against Joon-Hyuk's expensive suit were merely units to be retrieved, assets of a wealthy client who wanted her property back. "Step away from the children, sir," the hunter said. His voice was a flat, rehearsed monotone, the sound of a man who had done this 100 times before. "They've wandered away from their guardian. We're here to return them safely." Joon-Hyuk didn't move. He didn't even look up at first. He picked up his scotch, the ice clinking softly against the crystal, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The twins' grip on his sleeves tightened until their knuckles were bone-white. He could feel the heat of their terror radiating through his shirt. The girl on his left, Nia, buried her face in the crook of his elbow, her small body racking with a silent sob that vibrated against his skin. The other, Zuri, stared at the hunter with wide, glassy eyes, her lower lip trembling with a bravery she shouldn't have to possess. "Safe," Joon-Hyuk repeated. The word came out like a low growl, vibrating in the back of his throat. He set the glass down with a heavy, final thunk on the mahogany table. "Is that what you call the bruises I see on their wrists? Is that why they're begging a stranger to be their father?" The hunter's expression shifted, a flicker of annoyance crossing his professional mask. He glanced at his 2 partners, who had fanned out to cover the exits of the restaurant. The few other diners in the establishment had already sensed the change in the air, The waiters had vanished into the kitchen, and the soft jazz music playing over the speakers felt suddenly, sickeningly out of place. "I won't ask again," the hunter said, his hand sliding toward the lapel of his coat. "The client is losing patience. These children have foreign blood that doesn't belong in this city's elite circles. We have orders to remove them and ensure they are relocated. If you interfere, you become part of the cleanup." Joon-Hyuk finally lifted his gaze. In the underworld, they called this look the dragon's eclipse. It was the moment the warmth left his eyes and was replaced by a cold, predatory vacuum. He had spent 6 years trying to bury this version of himself, trying to believe that he could be just a businessman, a man of ledgers and boardrooms. But the scent of jasmine on the girl's hair and the mention of their blood had torn the stitches off his old wounds. "Relocated," Joon-Hyuk whispered. He stood up slowly. He was a head taller than the hunter, his shoulders broad and draped in a suit that cost more than the hunter's life was worth. "You've made 2 mistakes today. The first was entering this restaurant. The second was touching what belongs to me." "They don't belong to you?" the hunter sneered, his hand finally gripping the handle of a suppressed pistol hidden beneath his coat. "They belong to Madame Kang's decree." 3 seconds, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "What?" "1." Joon-Hyuk moved. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution of physics. Before the hunter could clear his holster, Joon-Hyuk's hand shot out like a strike from a cobra, his fingers locking around the man's throat with crushing force. He didn't use his gun. That would be too quick, too merciful for a man who had made children cry. He slammed the hunter's head into the edge of the mahogany table. The sound of bone meeting would echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. The man collapsed, his eyes rolling back as he slumped to the floor, unconscious before he even hit the carpet. The other 2 cleaners reacted instantly, reaching for their weapons, but they were already too late. Joon-Hyuk had spent his youth in the back alleys of Incheon, fighting for every breath, before he became the king of Seoul's shadows. He grabbed a steak knife from the table and threw it with a flick of his wrist. It buried itself in the shoulder of the man on the right, the force spinning him around and sending his gun clattering across the floor. Joon-Hyuk didn't wait. He vaulted over the table, his movements a blur of lethal grace. The third man managed to fire a shot, the bullet whistling past Joon-Hyuk's ear and shattering a bottle of expensive cognac behind the bar. But he didn't get a second chance. Joon-Hyuk delivered a spinning kick to the man's ribs, a sickening crack echoing in the room, followed by a palm strike to the chin that snapped his head back, knocking him out cold. The restaurant fell into a deafening silence, save for the heavy breathing of the wounded man on the floor and the soft, rhythmic sobbing of the twins. Joon-Hyuk stood in the center of the carnage, his suit jacket slightly rumpled, his expression as unreadable as stone. He didn't look at the fallen men. He looked at the twins, who were staring at him from the booth, their eyes wider than ever. Not with terror of him, but with a sudden, flickering hope. He walked back to the table, his steps soft on the carpet. He reached out a hand, then paused, noticing the blood on his knuckles. He took a white linen napkin from the table, wiped his hand clean, and dropped it onto the floor. Then, he knelt down so he was at eye level with the girls. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice had transformed. The gravelly, lethal edge was gone, replaced by a tenderness that felt alien to his own throat. Nia and Zuri shook their heads in unison. They scrambled out of the booth and threw themselves at him, their small arms wrapping around his neck so tightly it was hard to breathe. They smelled like the rain outside, but beneath that, the jasmine was stronger now, a scent that pulled at a string in Joon-Hyuk's heart that had been taut for 6 years. "You saved us," Zuri whispered, her face buried in his shoulder. "You really are a hero." Joon-Hyuk closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of them against him feeling more substantial than all the billions in his bank accounts. "I'm not a hero," he murmured into their hair, "but I am your father." He pulled back slightly, holding them by their small shoulders. He needed to be sure. He needed the name he had been searching for every night in his dreams for over 2,000 days. "Tell me," he said, his voice urgent but soft. "What is your mother's name? Where is she?" The twins looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. Then, Nia spoke, her voice small but clear. Her name is Amara. Amara Cole. She told us to run. She told us to find someone who looked like the man in her locket. The mention of the locket sent a jolt through Joon-Hyuk. He remembered that locket. He had given it to her on their last night together, a small gold piece with his initials engraved on the inside. He had told her it was a key to his heart. He hadn't realized it would one day be the compass that brought his children home. Where is she, Nia? Zuri? Where did she tell you to run from? The bakery, Zuri said, pointing toward the window. The men, they were hurting her. They said she shouldn't have come back to Korea. They said she was a mistake. Joon-Hyuk's jaw tightened until it ached. He knew exactly what was happening. His mother, Madame Kang, had found out that Amara had returned. She had found out about the foreign blood that now carried the Kang legacy. And she had sent her hounds to erase the evidence of her son's disobedience. He stood up, scooping both girls into his arms. They were light, far too light for 5-year-olds, and he felt a fresh wave of fury at the thought of what they must have endured. He walked toward the back exit of the restaurant, ignoring the groans of the men on the floor. His personal security team, having finally realized the situation, burst through the front doors, but Joon-Hyuk ignored them. "Clean this up," he barked at his lead head of security, a man named Min-ho who looked at the scene with shock. "I want these men taken to the basement. Do not let them speak to anyone. And get the car around. Now." "Sir, where are you going?" Min-ho asked, stepping aside as Joon-Hyuk marched past. "To finish a war that should have ended 6 years ago," Joon-Hyuk said. He stepped out into the rain, shielding the girls with his body as they moved toward the black armored SUV idling at the curb. The rain was cold, but Joon-Hyuk felt a fire burning in his chest that no storm could extinguish. He climbed into the back seat. The twins huddled on either side of him, and as the door clicked shut, sealing them in a world of leather and silence, he looked at his daughters. "Is Mommy going to be okay?" Nia asked, her voice trembling again as the adrenaline began to fade. Joon-Hyuk reached out, brushing a stray braid away from her forehead. He looked at the twins, his daughters, and saw the face of the woman he had loved and lost. He saw the strength in their eyes and the vulnerability in their small hands. "I'm going to bring her home," Joon-Hyuk promised. It wasn't just a statement. It was a vow, a blood oath that would shake the foundations of the Kang Empire. "I'm going to bring her home, and I'm going to make sure no one ever makes you run again." He pulled Nia and Zuri into his lap, their small heads resting against his chest. He could hear their heartbeats, too fast, rhythmic pulses that matched the cadence of his own. He realized then that he had been a king without a kingdom for 6 years. He had built skyscrapers and amassed fortunes, but he had been ruling over a wasteland of shadows. "What's dirty blood, Appa?" Zuri asked suddenly, her voice muffled against his suit. The bad lady kept saying it. She said we were dirty. Joon-Hyuk felt a growl building in his chest. He squeezed them tighter, his voice dropping to a low, fierce whisper. "Don't you ever listen to that word. Your blood is the blood of the dragon. It is the blood of a woman who fought through fire to keep you safe. It is the purest thing in this city, and anyone who says otherwise will have to answer to me." He looked out the window as the SUV sped through the neon-lit streets of Seoul, headed toward the city's older district. He knew the bakery they were talking about. A small, tucked-away place where Amara would have tried to hide, tried to build a life in the shadows just like he had. But the shadows weren't safe anymore. He checked the magazine of his Glock, the metallic click sounding loud in the quiet car. He didn't want the girls to see what was coming, but he also knew he couldn't hide the truth from them. They were Kangs. They were born of fire and secrets. "Min-ho," Joon-Hyuk said into the intercom. "Yes, sir. Contact the hospital. Have a private wing cleared. I want the best trauma team on standby. And call my mother's estate. Tell her I'm coming for tea tomorrow morning. Tell her she should prepare her finest service, because I'm bringing her grandchildren to meet her." "Sir, Madame Kang will." "I don't care what she will do," Joon-Hyuk interrupted. "The time for her rules is over. This is my house now, my legacy, my family, As the SUV screeched around a corner, the old district coming into view, Joon-Hyuk saw the flickering lights of police sirens in the distance, near a small shop with a shattered front window. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Amara," he whispered to the glass, his breath fogging the window. "Hold on. I'm coming." He looked down at the twins, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion and fallen into a light, fitful sleep in his arms. He looked at Nia's small hand, curled around his thumb, and Zuri's head resting over his heart. In this moment, the billionaire, the mafia boss, the dragon, he was gone. There was only a father who had been given a second chance, and God help anyone who tried to take it away from him again. The car came to a jarring halt in front of the bakery. Joon-Hyuk didn't wait for the door to be opened. He handed the sleeping girls to Min-ho with a look that said, "Protect them with your life," and then he stepped out into the rain. The air smelled of smoke and yeast. The front window of Amara's Sweets was a jagged hole of broken glass. Two men in slate-gray coats were standing by a dark sedan, trying to drag a struggling woman toward the open trunk. Joon-Hyuk didn't shout. He didn't warn them. He simply walked toward them through the downpour, the rain washing the last of the businessman away, leaving only the man who would burn the world down to see her smile again. "Let her go," Joon-Hyuk said. The men turned, surprised by the lone figure approaching them. One of them began to raise a crowbar, a sneer on his face. "This don't concern you, pal. Move along." Joon-Hyuk didn't stop walking. "You have 3 seconds to realize you're dead." 1. He didn't get to 3. He didn't need to. As he closed the distance, his eyes locked onto the woman's face. The dark skin, the fierce, terrified eyes, the way she fought even when she was broken. It was her. It was his Amara. And as she saw him, really saw him, the fight left her for a split second, replaced by a shock so profound it looked like pain. "Joon-Hyuk?" she gasped. "I'm here," he said, his voice a roar that drowned out the rain. "And I'm never leaving you again." He launched himself at the first man, his fist connecting with a force that sent the thug flying backward into the shattered storefront. He was the dragon, he was the king, and he was home. And tonight, Seoul would learn that the only thing more dangerous than a mafia boss with nothing to lose was a father who had finally found everything. The rain over the old district of Seoul didn't just fall. It hammered against the pavement like a million silver needles, washing away the neon glow of the city and replacing it with a cold, oppressive gray. Kang Joon-Hyuk stepped out of his armored SUV, the heavy thud of the door closing behind him sounding like the first beat of a war drum. He didn't look back at the vehicle where his daughters, Nia and Zuri, were being shielded by the elite security detail he had commanded to protect them with their lives. His focus was singular, narrowed down to the shattered storefront of Amara's Sweets, and the two shadows in slate-gray coats who were currently trying to extinguish the only light he had ever truly known. He moved through the downpour with a terrifying, rhythmic calm. His black silk overcoat caught the wind, billowing behind him like the wings of a dark omen. 6 years of calculated restraint, 6 years of trying to be a legitimate businessman, and 6 years of living as a hollow shell of a man evaporated with every step he took toward the struggle unfolding in the alleyway. The men were clumsy, fueled by the arrogance of predators who thought their prey was helpless. They didn't hear him coming. The rain muffled his footsteps, but even if it hadn't, Joon-Hyuk moved with the silence of a ghost. As he closed the distance, he saw her. Amara. She was pinned against the brick wall of the bakery, her dark skin glistening with rain and sweat, her eyes, those fierce, intelligent eyes that had once looked at him with such tenderness, now wide with a primal, desperate courage. One of the men had his hand buried in her hair, pulling her head back to force her toward the open trunk of a black sedan, while the other raised a heavy crowbar, his face twisted in a sneer of petty triumph. "I told you, girl," the man with the crowbar barked, his voice straining to be heard over the storm. "You should have stayed in the dirt where you came from. Madame Kang doesn't like loose ends, especially not ones that look like you." Amara didn't scream. She didn't beg. Even with her lips split and a bruise darkening her cheek, she spat at the man's feet, her voice a low, defiant rasp. "My daughters are gone. You'll never find them. Do whatever you want to me, but you've already lost." "We'll find them," the man replied, raising the metal bar. And when we do, we'll make sure they forget you ever existed. He never got to swing. Joon-Hyuk's hand shot out from the shadows, his fingers locking around the man's wrist with the crushing pressure of a hydraulic press. The sound of the metal bar hitting the wet pavement was the only warning the second man got. Joon-Hyuk didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The predatory amber of his eyes, glowing even in the darkness of the alley, told the entire story. The man holding Amara's hair froze, his eyes bulging as he looked at the figure that had appeared out of the rain. "Who the hell are you? Get lost before." He didn't finish the sentence. Joon-Hyuk delivered a short, brutal punch to the solar plexus of the man holding the crowbar, sending him collapsing to his knees, gasping for air that refused to come. Then, with a fluid, terrifying grace, Joon-Hyuk turned his attention to the man holding Amara. He stepped into the man's personal space, the sheer weight of his presence forcing the thug to instinctively let go of Amara and reach for a concealed weapon. "You have 3 seconds to realize you're already dead," Joon-Hyuk whispered. His voice was lower than the thunder rolling overhead, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of the thug's bones. 1. Joon-Hyuk grabbed the man's extended arm, snapping the elbow with a sickening crack that echoed off the damp brick walls. The man's scream was cut short as Joon-Hyuk followed up with a palm strike to the chin, a blow delivered with such precise, overwhelming force that it lifted the man off his feet before slamming him into the side of the sedan. The metal of the car door crumpled under the impact, and the man slid to the ground, a heap of broken bones and shattered pride. The first man, still clutching his stomach and gasping on the ground, tried to scramble toward a fallen pistol. Joon-Hyuk didn't even look at him. He simply extended his foot, his heavy boot pinning the man's hand to the concrete with enough pressure to make the small bones in his fingers groan. "I believe you were talking about my daughters," Joon-Hyuk said, his voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. He leaned down, his face inches from the terrified henchman. "And I believe you mentioned my mother. Tell me, did she tell you to be careful? Did she warn you what happens when someone touches the dragon's heart? Please." The man wheezed, his face pale with the realization of who stood over him. We were just following orders. So-Yun. She paid us extra to make it look like an accident." Joon-Hyuk's eyes darkened. So, it wasn't just his mother's cold legacy. It was the jealous, poisonous reach of Yoon Seo-Yun. He felt a cold, white-hot fury boiling in his veins, a desire to erase every trace of these people from the earth. But then he felt a hand on his arm. It was a light touch, trembling and cold from the rain, but it acted like a lightning rod, grounding the electric rage that threatened to consume him. He turned his head slowly. Amara was standing there, leaning against the wall for support. Her clothes were torn, her hair a mess of tangled braids and wet strands, but she was looking at him with an expression that shattered the last of his frozen heart. It was shock, yes. It was disbelief. But beneath it all, there was a glimmer of the woman who had once told him that his soul was worth saving. "Joon-Hyuk?" she whispered, her voice breaking on his name. Is it really you?" The dragon vanished. The Mafia boss, the billionaire, the cold king of the Seoul underworld. All of it fell away, leaving only a man who had been wandering in a desert for 6 years and had finally found an oasis. He let go of the man on the ground, ignoring the thug as he scrambled away into the darkness. Joon-Hyuk reached out, his hand shaking as he cupped Amara's face. "I'm here," he said, his voice thick with a decade of unshed grief and unvoiced promises. "I'm here, Amara. I'm so sorry it took me so long. I'm so sorry I let them hurt you." Amara let out a sob that sounded like a physical release, her knees finally giving way. Joon-Hyuk caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her into the shelter of his chest, his overcoat wrapping around her like a shield. She buried her face in his neck, her hands clutching at the expensive fabric of his suit as if she feared he might vanish if she let go. "The girls," she gasped into his skin, her voice frantic. "Nia and Zuri, they took them. They chased them into the street. I told them to run to the big restaurant. I told them. They found me, Amara," Joon-Hyuk interrupted, his voice a soothing low rumble against her ear. "They're safe. They're right there in the car. They're waiting for you. Amara pulled back, her eyes searching his. They found you? They're okay? You saw them. They have your eyes, Joon-Hyuk said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time in years. And they have my temper. They're the bravest things I've ever seen. They found me in the restaurant, Amara. They asked me to be their father. They didn't even know. They just knew they could trust me. Amara collapsed against him again, her body shaking with relief. For a long moment, they stayed like that, two figures silhouetted against the rain and the ruins of the bakery. The world around them was chaotic. The sirens were getting louder. The smell of smoke from the small fire in the shop was thick in the air. But in the center of Joon-Hyuk's arms, there was a sudden, impossible peace. But the peace was short-lived. Joon-Hyuk's internal radar, honed by years of surviving in a world of vipers, felt a shift in the atmosphere. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he saw the headlights of 3 more black sedans turning the corner of the narrow street. They were moving fast, the engines roaring with a predatory intent. Min-ho! Joon-Hyuk barked into the small mic at his collar. Status! Sir, we have incoming. Multiple vehicles. It looks like Seo-Yun's personal guard. They've bypassed the local police perimeter. We need to move now. Joon-Hyuk didn't hesitate. He swept Amara up into his arms, carrying her toward the SUV. She was light, far too light, her body carrying the physical evidence of 6 years of struggle and sacrifice. As he reached the vehicle, the door slid open, and the twins' faces appeared in the opening, their eyes wide with joy and terror as they saw their mother. Mommy! Nia and Zuri screamed in unison, their small arms reaching out. Joon-Hyuk placed Amara into the seat, watching as the 3 of them collided in a tangle of limbs and tears. He wanted to climb in after them, to seal the door and never look back, but the roar of the approaching sedans told him that wouldn't be enough. If he ran now, they would be hunted forever. He needed to end this tonight. He needed to show them that the dragon wasn't just back. He was hungry. Min-ho! Take them to the safe house, Joon-Hyuk commanded, his voice returning to its granite-hard authority. Go the long way. Use the decoys. If a single scratch appears on that car, don't bother coming back. Sir, what about you? Min-ho asked, his hand on the steering wheel, his eyes on the approaching headlights. Joon-Hyuk looked at Amara. She was holding the twins, her eyes meeting his through the window. She saw the look in his eyes, the return of the man she feared, but also the man she knew was the only thing standing between her children and a grave. She nodded once, a silent understanding passing between them. I'm going to stay behind and remind them whose city this is, Joon-Hyuk said. Joon-Hyuk, wait! Amara called out, her hand pressing against the glass. Don't become the monster they want you to be. Joon-Hyuk paused, his hand on the door handle. He looked at the twins, who were watching him with a mixture of awe and fear. He realized then that he couldn't just be a killer anymore. He had to be a father. But to be a father, he had to be a wall. I'm not doing this for them. In less than 3 minutes, the street was silent again, save for the moans of the defeated and the hiss of steam from a punctured radiator. Joon-Hyuk stood over the last mercenary, a man twice his size who was now clutching a shattered knee. Joon-Hyuk didn't even look winded. His suit was ruined, his face was smeared with oil and rain, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in 6 years. He walked toward Seo-Yun's car. She was huddled in the back seat, the doors locked, her face pale with a terror she couldn't hide. Joon-Hyuk didn't try the handle. He simply raised his foot and kicked the window. The reinforced glass shattered into 1,000 diamonds. He reached in and grabbed her by the lapel of her red coat, pulling her out through the window. She stumbled onto the wet pavement, her designer heels snapping, her hair plastered to her face. Please, she whimpered, the madness in her eyes replaced by the primal fear of the hunted. Joon-Hyuk, we were supposed to be together. Our families, the business, your mother. My mother is a woman who has forgotten what it means to be human, Joon-Hyuk said, his hand tightening on her coat. And you are a mistake I should have corrected a long time ago. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper that made her heart skip a beat. I'm not going to kill you, Seo-Yun. That would be too easy. I'm going to let you live. I'm going to let you watch as I dismantle everything you and my mother have built. I'm going to take your companies, your reputation, and your freedom. And every time you close your eyes in your cell, I want you to remember the faces of the two little girls you called dirty, because they are the ones who are going to inherit your world. He tossed her aside like a piece of trash. He didn't look back as he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Min-ho, he said, his voice calm and steady. The street is clear. Send the cleanup crew. And tell the family, tell Amara, that I'm coming home. He looked up at the sky. The rain was finally starting to let up, a sliver of moonlight breaking through the clouds. He looked at the bakery, the place where Amara had hidden, where she had fought for their children every day for 6 years. He walked over to the shattered window and picked up a small, charred loaf of bread that had survived the struggle. He held it in his hand, the warmth of the memory of her scent filling his senses. He wasn't the dragon anymore. He wasn't the Mafia boss. He was just a man who had been lost and was finally found. He climbed into a secondary vehicle his team had brought around, the engine purring like a satisfied beast. As he drove away from the old district, heading toward the safe house where his life was waiting for him, he looked in the rearview mirror. The gray night was fading. The first hint of dawn was touching the skyline of Seoul. For 6 years, he had lived in a world where the sun never rose. But tonight, the dragon had fought for the dawn. And as he thought of Nia, Zuri, and Amara, he realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. The battle was far from over. His mother would not go down without a fight, and the corporate war was just beginning. But as Joon-Hyuk felt the cold weight of his wedding ring, the one he had never taken off, he knew he would win, because he wasn't fighting for power anymore. He was fighting for home. And in this city, there was nothing more dangerous than a man who finally had something to lose. The silence inside the armored SUV was a living thing, thick with the unsaid and the heavy scent of rain and antiseptic. Joon-Hyuk sat in the middle of the rear bench, his massive frame a literal shield between the world and the 3 people who had just become his entire universe. Nia and Zuri had finally succumbed to the crushing weight of the day's trauma, their small heads lolling against his shoulders, their breathing rhythmic and shallow. Amara sat to his right, her hand trembling as she reached out to stroke Zuri's hair. She looked fragile in the dim cabin light, her skin pale under the bruises. But there was a steel in her gaze that even 6 years of hiding hadn't been able to break. They didn't speak until the vehicle bypassed the main gates of his private penthouse, spiraling up through the hidden service elevator that led directly into his personal sanctuary. This wasn't the Kang family estate. It was his fortress, a glass and steel monolith overlooking the Han River, where even his mother's influence stopped at the door. As the elevator doors hissed open, Joon-Hyuk gathered both girls into his arms, refusing to let his security team touch them. He carried them into a guest suite prepared with the speed of a military operation, laying them down on silk sheets that cost more than the bakery they had just fled. Once the girls were tucked in, watched over by a medical team sworn to absolute secrecy, Joon-Hyuk led Amara into the main living area. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul's neon arteries, but the room felt small, charged with the electricity of a confrontation 6 years in the making. He poured 2 glasses of water, his hands steady despite the storm raging in his chest, and handed one to her. "Drink," he commanded softly. "Then tell me everything. Start from the night of the fire. I want every word, Amara. No more shadows." Amara took the glass, her fingers brushing his, and the contact sent a jolt through him that made his breath catch. She sat on the edge of the leather sofa, looking out at the city that had tried to swallow her whole. "The fire wasn't an accident, Joon-Hyuk. I think you always knew that, even if you didn't want to believe how deep the rot went." She took a jagged breath, the memory surfacing like a ghost. "I was in the apartment. I had just finished my shift at the office. I was waiting for you. I had something to tell you. Something that made my heart beat so fast I thought I'd faint." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. "I had gone to the doctor that morning. I was 3 weeks pregnant. I was terrified, but I was so happy because it was ours. I was going to tell you that night. I was going to tell you that we were going to be a family, Despite your mother, despite the rules. Joon-Hyuk felt the floor tilt beneath him. 3 weeks. He had been a father before she even left, and he had spent 6 years in total ignorance of his own heart walking outside his body. He sat opposite her, his knees nearly touching hers, his gaze locked on her face. I heard them before I saw the smoke, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Men in gray coats. They didn't just start the fire. They blocked the door from the outside. They wanted me to burn. They wanted the mistake erased before it could even be spoken aloud. I only got out through the laundry chute. I crawled through the ash, bleeding and half blind, and I went straight to your house. I thought if I could just reach you, you would protect me. I didn't care about the danger anymore. I just needed my Joon-Hyuk. She paused, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping her lips. I reached the back garden. I was about to knock on the study door when I heard her. Your mother. The windows were open to the summer air. She was screaming at you, but you weren't there. She was talking to a photo of your father. And then she turned to the door because someone had entered. It was Yoon Seo-yeon. Joon-Hyuk's jaw tightened until his teeth felt like they might crack. He remembered that night. His mother had summoned him to the estate, but he had been delayed by a business emergency. A distraction he now realized was likely orchestrated by Seo-yeon herself. I stood there, hidden by the hydrangeas, shivering in my burnt clothes, Amara said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. I heard Madame Kang tell Seo-yeon that she had taken care of the distraction. She said she would never allow a foreign impurity to pollute the Kang bloodline. She called me a parasite. She said that even if I were carrying your child, which she suspected, she would rather see the line end with you than see it continued with dirty blood. And Seo-yeon, she just laughed. She told your mother that once I was dead, you would have no choice but to marry her. They were bartering over my life, Joon-Hyuk. They were deciding the fate of my unborn children like they were weeds to be pulled from a garden. The silence that followed was deafening. Joon-Hyuk felt a cold, crystalline rage settling into his bones. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of a street fight. It was the calculated, lethal intent of a king who had just realized his own court had betrayed him. He reached out, taking Amara's hand in his thumb stroking her palm. So you ran, he said, his voice a low vibration. I had to, she sobbed, finally letting the wall crumble. If I stayed, they would have finished the job. If I told you, I knew you would go to war with them, and I thought they would kill you too. I couldn't let my babies grow up without a father because I was selfish. So I took the little money I had saved, I changed my name, and I disappeared. I went to the smallest towns, worked the hardest jobs, and I prayed every single night that you would forget me. Because if you forgot me, you were safe. But then I saw Nia's eyes, and I saw Zuri's smile, and every day, they looked more and more like the man I was trying to erase. They are 5 years old, Joon-Hyuk. 5 years of them asking why their daddy wasn't there. 5 years of me telling them you were a hero in a faraway land. All while I was terrified that the faraway land was only a 2-hour train ride away. Joon-Hyuk pulled her toward him, drawing her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her with a fierce, possessive strength. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, the scent of jasmine finally overcoming the smell of the fire. They called them dirty blood, Amara, he whispered into her skin, his voice thick with a promise of carnage. My mother, Seo-yeon. They looked at the most beautiful thing I have ever created and called it a mistake. He pulled back, his amber eyes glowing with a terrifying light. They think they are the architects of this city. They think their wealth makes them untouchable. But they forgot one thing. I am the one who keeps the shadows at bay. I am the one who built the walls they hide behind. And tonight, those walls are coming down. Amara looked at him, her hand touching his tattooed neck. What are you going to do? I'm going to do what I should have done 6 years ago, Joon-Hyuk said. I'm going to show them that there is no blood in this world purer than the blood of a father who has found his children. I'm going to take everything from them, Amara. Not just their money, not just their companies. I'm going to take their pride. I'm going to make them stand in the sun and admit that the foreign blood they despised is the only thing that has the right to carry the Kang name. He stood up, lifting her with him as if she weighed nothing. He walked her back to the guest suite, watching through the cracked door as Nia and Zuri slept peacefully, their small hands intertwined. He looked at his daughters. The 3-week secret that had survived a fire, a hunt, and 6 years of exile. Get some rest, he told Amara, kissing her forehead with a tenderness that made her eyes flutter shut. The medical team will stay with you. My best men are at the door. You are in the dragon's lair now, and nothing in heaven or earth can reach you here. As he walked back into the living room, he picked up his phone. He didn't call his lawyer. He didn't call his board of directors. He dialed the private number to the Kang estate, the one that rang directly in his mother's bedroom. The phone rang 3 times before a cold, aristocratic voice answered. Joon-Hyuk, do you have any idea what time it is? I expected you at dinner hours ago. So-yeon is quite upset. Mother, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice so calm it was chilling. I'm calling to tell you that the fire you started 6 years ago is finally out. But a new one has begun. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I don't know what you're talking about. You've been working too hard. Come home, and we will discuss your wedding. There will be no wedding, Joon-Hyuk said, looking out at the river. But there will be a reckoning. I have Nia and Zuri with me. I have Amara. And I have every record of the cleaners you sent to the bakery tonight. You told So-yeon that you'd rather the line end with me than see it continued with dirty blood. Well, congratulations, Mother. As of tonight, the Kang line, as you know, it is dead. I am starting a new one, and you are no longer invited to the palace. You wouldn't dare, Madame Kang hissed, her voice cracking with the first hint of fear. I am your mother. I made you, and I am the dragon, Joon-Hyuk replied. And you should have remembered. Dragons don't serve queens. They burn them. He hung up the phone and threw it onto the sofa. He walked to the window, watching the first hints of dawn touch the horizon. For 6 years, he had been a man of shadows, living for a legacy that hated him. But as he looked back at the door where his family lay safe, he realized he wasn't a mafia boss anymore. He was a father, and the world was about to find out exactly how far a father would go to protect his 3-week secret. The morning light that spilled into the penthouse was different from any dawn Kang Joon-Hyuk had experienced in his 35 years. Usually, the first rays of the sun were a reminder of pending contracts, territorial disputes, and the cold weight of the Kang crown. But today, the golden light felt soft, illuminating the quiet sanctuary he had built for the 3 people who had fundamentally rewritten his DNA. He stood in the doorway of the guest suite, a cup of untouched black coffee in his hand, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of the silk duvet. Nia and Zuri were sprawled out in the deep, restorative sleep of children who finally felt safe, their dark curls fanned out against the cream-colored pillows. He set the coffee on a side table and walked toward the bed, his footsteps making no sound on the plush carpet. He sat on the edge of the mattress, his large frame causing a slight dip that didn't wake them. For the first time, in the stillness of a room without rain or gunfire, he truly looked at them. He leaned in close, his amber eyes scanning their sleeping faces with a clinical intensity that slowly melted into raw, aching wonder. It was there, in the slope of Nia's jaw and the slight, persistent furrow in Zuri's brow even in sleep. It was the way their eyelashes cast long, delicate shadows against their cheeks, the exact same curve he saw in the mirror every morning. But it was more than just physical traits. He saw a familiar defiance in the way they held onto each other, a stubborn refusal to be broken that had carried them through 6 years of exile. He reached out, his hand hovering over Zuri's small, copper-toned hand. When he finally touched her skin, he felt a spark of recognition so profound it made his lungs tighten. This wasn't just foreign blood or a 3-week secret. This was his continuation. This was the king's own fire, tempered by Amara's grace, manifesting in 2 perfect, innocent souls. As Zuri stirred, her eyes fluttering open to meet his, Joon-Hyuk saw it. The sharp, intelligent spark of the dragon looking back at him from a 5-year-old's face. She didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply reached out and wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb, a gesture of absolute, terrifying ownership. You're still here, Zuri whispered, her voice thick with sleep but anchored by a growing trust. I'm never leaving, Joon-Hyuk replied, his voice a low, gravelly vow. He felt a lump in his throat he had to swallow back. I spent 6 years looking for the light, Zuri. I didn't know it was you and your sister all along. Nia woke a moment later, rubbing her eyes and sitting up. She looked at Joon-Hyuk, then at the luxury of the room, and finally at her mother, who was beginning to stir in the lounge chair by the window. The girls scrambled toward him, climbing into his lap as if it were the safest throne in the world. As he held them, feeling the warmth of their bodies and the fragile beat of their hearts against his chest, the last of his hesitation crumbled. He realized that the wealth he had amassed, the fear he had instilled in his enemies, and the legacy his mother protected so viciously were all ash compared to the weight of these two children. Amara stood up, walking over to join them. She looked rested, though the shadows of the past 6 years still lingered in the corners of her eyes. She watched the scene, the feared Dragon of Seoul being used as a climbing frame by two little girls, and a soft, genuine smile finally broke through her exhaustion. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hand resting on Joon-Hyuk's shoulder, completing the circle. They have your stubbornness, she murmured, watching Nia try to figure out how his heavy watch worked. I tried to tell them stories about you, but I think they always knew they were part of something bigger. They never quite fit into the quiet life I tried to build for them. They were always looking for the sky. Joon-Hyuk looked up at Amara, his expression hardening into something fiercely protective. My mother called them a mistake. She told Seo-yun that our blood was an impurity. He tightened his grip on the girls, his knuckles turning white. She thinks she can dictate who belongs in this world based on a map and a family tree. She thinks her pure lineage is worth more than the lives of my daughters. He stood up, still holding both girls, and walked toward the massive window overlooking the city. Below them, Seoul was waking up, a sprawling machine of millions of lives, all moving according to rules and hierarchies. From this height, the people looked like ants, but Joon-Hyuk knew that in the mansions and boardrooms of the elite, his mother was already moving her pieces. She would be calling the board, freezing accounts, and whispering to the press. She would try to frame this as a kidnapping or a mental breakdown. She's going to come for us, Amara, Joon-Hyuk said, his reflection in the glass looking back at him with a lethal clarity. She'll use every billion she has to try and separate us. She'll try to prove that you are an outsider and that these girls are a threat to the Kang name. Amara walked up behind him, her reflection appearing beside his. I'm not afraid of her anymore, Joon-Hyuk. I spent 6 years running. I'm tired. If she wants to take them, she'll have to go through me. She won't get that far, Joon-Hyuk promised. He turned back to the room, setting the girls down gently. He looked at them with a gaze that was no longer just a father's love, but a king's decree. Listen to me, Nia. Zuri, you are Kang's. Your blood is the blood of the dragon. That means you never bow, you never hide, and you never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Because you're the king? Nia asked, her eyes wide. Because I am your father, he corrected. And because I am going to build a world where no one can ever touch you again. Not the bad men from the bakery. Not the lady in the red coat. And especially not my mother. He walked over to his desk and picked up a small, encrypted tablet. With a few swift strokes, he began the process of moving his personal assets, the billions he had earned independently of the Kang family holdings, into a private trust for the girls and Amara. He began a scorched earth digital protocol that would begin systematically isolating his mother's business interests from his own. For years, he had been the engine that kept the Kang empire running. Today, he was pulling the plug. He felt a strange, liberating sense of peace. For 35 years, he had been a son, a soldier, and a boss. He had lived by the codes of a family that valued purity over people and power over peace. But as he looked at Nia and Zuri, who were now trying to mimic his serious expression, he realized that the DNA of a true king wasn't about the past. It was about what he was willing to protect in the future. Min-ho, he called out. The door opened instantly, and his head of security stepped in, bowing low. Yes, sir. Increase the perimeter. I want the air filtration checked, the water supply monitored, and a drone sweep of the neighboring rooftops every 10 minutes. If a single person from the Kang estate so much as breathes on the sidewalk below this building, I want to know about it. Understood, sir. And regarding the meeting with your mother, Joon-Hyuk looked at Amara, then at his daughters. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small gold locket Amara had mentioned, the one the girls had used to find him. He held it in his palm, the gold catching the morning sun. Tell her the meeting is moved, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice dropping into a register that made Min-ho visibly straighten. I'm not coming to her estate. If she wants to see the future of the Kang family, she can come here. She can walk into my territory. She can look into the eyes of the children she tried to kill and tell them to their faces that they are a mistake. He turned back to the window, the city of Seoul spread out before him like a game board. He had the money, he had the power, and now he had the reason. He saw himself in his daughter's eyes, not the monster his mother had raised, but the man he was meant to be. The hunt is over, he whispered to the glass, his breath fogging the view of the Kang conglomerate building in the distance. From now on, the dragon isn't hiding. The dragon is coming for everything you own. He felt Amara's hand slip into his, her fingers interlacing with his tattooed ones. He looked down at Nia and Zuri, who were now playing with a set of silver chess pieces on the coffee table, unaware that they were the most valuable players in the world. He vowed then, with a silent, ironclad oath, that he would turn this city into a fortress for them. He would spend every drop of his blood and every cent of his fortune to ensure that they never knew the cold, the rain, or the fear ever again. He was a Kang. He was the dragon. But above all, he was a father. And the world was about to learn that there is no power on earth more absolute than the DNA of a king who has finally found his home. He leaned down, kissing the tops of his daughters' heads, his eyes never leaving the horizon. The war was coming, but for the first time in 6 years, Kang Joon-Hyuk wasn't afraid. He was ready. The glass and steel sanctuary of the penthouse felt colder the moment the private elevator chimed, signaling an arrival that had been looming like a gathering storm. Kang Joon-Hyuk did not rise from his seat at the head of the dark marble dining table. He sat with his hands folded, his silhouette framed by the sprawling, indifferent skyline of Seoul. Beside him, Amara stood like a silent sentinel, her hand resting protectively on Nia's shoulder, while Zuri huddled close to her mother's side. The twins were dressed in soft, expensive wool sweaters Joon-Hyuk had ordered delivered an hour ago, a small comfort against the icy confrontation that was about to unfold. The doors slid open with a whisper of mechanical precision, and the air in the room seemed to vanish. Madame Kang Sun-hee stepped out first, her presence a masterclass in aristocratic frost. She was draped in a charcoal silk hanbok that spoke of ancient tradition and immovable power, her silver hair pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to sharpen her already lethal features. Behind her, trailing like a toxic shadow, was Yoon Seo-yeon. The younger woman had traded her rain-soaked red coat for a tailored white power suit, her eyes hidden behind oversized designer glasses, though the tremor in her hands betrayed the humiliation she had suffered in the rain the night before. Madame Kang didn't look at the sprawling view, nor did she look at the state-of-the-art security detail flanking the room. Her eyes went straight to the children. She didn't look at them with the wonder of a grandmother. She looked at them with the clinical revulsion one might reserve for a smudge on a pristine diamond. This is the fortress you've built, Joon-Hyuk? Madame Kang's voice was like dry parchment, brittle and sharp. She didn't wait for an invitation to sit. She walked to the opposite end of the table, her gaze finally landing on her son. You've turned your back on your heritage, your duties, and your mother for this? Joon-Hyuk's amber eyes didn't blink. I haven't turned my back on anything, mother. I simply opened my eyes. And what I see is a family legacy built on the bones of people you deemed disposable. Don't be dramatic, Seo-yeon interjected, her voice shrill with a desperate, practiced confidence. She stepped forward, placing a thick leather-bound folder on the marble table. Joon-Hyuk, let's be adults. Last night was a misunderstanding. Adrenaline and rain make people do strange things. But the world is still turning. The market opened this morning, and the Kangyun merger is the only thing the investors are talking about. She pushed the folder toward him. This is a clean slate, a business merger disguised as a marriage. It's the largest consolidation of power in the history of this country. Your mother and my father have already signed the preliminary agreements. All we need is your signature. Once the wedding is announced, these guests can be handled quietly. Joon-Hyuk looked at the folder as if it were a dead animal. Handled quietly? Madame Kang leaned forward, her perfume, a cloying scent of lilies and old money, filling the space. We are prepared to be generous, Joon-Hyuk. For the sake of your blood, I will allow the woman to be compensated. A trust fund will be set up in a foreign country, Switzerland perhaps, or somewhere in the Americas. She will take the girls, and they will live a life of luxury they could never dream of in a bakery. In exchange, they sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. They vanish. The Kang name remains pure. You marry Seo-Yun. You take your place as the undisputed chairman, and this unfortunate lapse in judgment becomes a footnote in history. Amara's grip on Nia tightened. She didn't speak, but her eyes were fixed on Joon-Hyuk, a silent challenge to the man she had once loved. She was waiting to see if the dragon was still a beast on a leash. Joon-Hyuk slowly stood up. He walked toward his mother, his footsteps echoing like slow, deliberate heartbeats. He stopped inches from her, the height difference forcing the matriarch to look up, though she refused to show fear. You speak of purity, as if it's a currency, mother, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. You spent 6 years trying to erase my daughters because their mother didn't share your pedigree. You sent men to burn them out of existence. And now, you come into my home and offer me a contract to sell my own soul. It is not a contract. It is a salvation, Madame Kang hissed, slamming her palm against the table. Look at them. They are a constant reminder of your weakness. They are foreign blood, Joon-Hyuk. They will never be accepted in our circles. They will be mocked, whispered about, and eventually, they will become a liability to the empire. I am trying to protect the Kang legacy from the contamination you brought into it. The word contamination hung in the air like a foul mist. Nia tucked her head into her mother's waist, sensing the venom in the older woman's tone. Joon-Hyuk turned his head toward Seo-Yun. And you? You're willing to marry a man who would trade his children for a board seat? Is that the life you envisioned, Seo-Yun? A marriage built on the ashes of my family. Seo-Yun straightened her blazer, a cold, entitled smirk returning to her face. Power is the only thing that lasts, Joon-Hyuk. Love is a temporary chemical reaction. In 10 years, you won't even remember their names. But you will remember the day you became the most powerful man in Asia. Send the foreigners away. It's for the best. Even they will be happier among their own kind. Joon-Hyuk reached out and picked up the merger folder. For a second, Madame Kang's eyes lit up with a flicker of triumph. She believed she had won. She believed the dragon was finally returning to the cave she had carved for him. Then, with a slow, effortless motion, Joon-Hyuk tore the leather binding in half. He ripped the pages again and again, the sound of shredding paper filling the silent room. He dropped the white confetti onto the marble table, right in front of his mother. The merger is dead, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice flat and final. And so is the Kang-Yun alliance. As of this morning, I have liquidated my personal shares in the Yun Group. I have initiated a hostile takeover of your father's primary subsidiaries, Seo-Yun. By the time you get back to your office, your family will be fighting for their financial lives. Seo-Yun's face went white. You can't do that. That's suicide. For you, perhaps, Joon-Hyuk countered. For me, it's just a Tuesday. He turned back to his mother. Madame Kang was trembling, not with sadness, but with a rage so potent it seemed to age her 10 years in a second. You would destroy everything I built for a secretary and 2 bastards? Joon-Hyuk leaned down, his face inches from hers. They are not bastards. They are my daughters. And Amara is not a secretary. She is the woman who showed me that the Kang legacy was a cage. You wanted to protect the bloodline, mother? Well, you succeeded. You've ensured that the pure version of the Kang family ends with you. Because from this day forward, I am removing your name from every building, every foundation, and every record I control. You can't remove me, she shrieked. I am the matriarch. You are a ghost, Joon-Hyuk corrected. And you are no longer welcome in the world I am building for my children. He signaled to Min-ho, who stepped forward with 4 other security guards. Escort Madame Kang and Miss Yoon to the elevator. If they ever set foot on this property again, treat them as hostile intruders. Joon-Hyuk, Madame Kang screamed as the guards firmly but respectfully took her by the arms. You will regret this. You will be a king of nothing. They will ruin you. I'd rather be a king of nothing with them, Joon-Hyuk said, looking back at Amara and the twins, than a king of your world with a heart of stone. The elevator doors closed on Madame Kang's screams and Seo-Yun's stunned silence. The room was suddenly, blissfully quiet. The foreigners had won. The business merger was in tatters. And for the first time in his life, Kang Joon-Hyuk felt like he could breathe. He walked over to the table and swept the shredded remains of the contract onto the floor. He looked at Amara, who was watching him with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. He reached out, taking her hand and pulling her into the space beside him. It's over, he whispered. They can't touch us anymore. Nia and Zuri looked up at him, their small faces bright with curiosity. Is the bad lady gone, Appa? Zuri asked. She's gone, Joon-Hyuk said, picking her up and settling her on his hip. He looked at the twins, his daughters, his blood, his future. He didn't care about the board meetings or the stock prices. He didn't care about the purity of a name that had been dragged through the mud of his mother's ambition. He looked at the shredded paper on the floor and then at the sunrise over the city. He had chosen poverty with love over wealth with blood. Yet as he felt Amara's hand in his, he knew he was the richest man in the world. He was the dragon, but he wasn't alone. And as the sun hit the glass of the penthouse, the light was gold. Not the gold of a crown, but the gold of a new beginning. The transition from the high-altitude luxury of the penthouse to the secluded, traditional elegance of the Kang secondary estate felt like moving from a fortress into a trap. Joon-Hyuk had moved Amara and the twins there under the cover of darkness, reasoning that the mountain villa, a property owned solely under his name and detached from the main conglomerate holdings, would be the last place his mother or Seo-Yun would look. The estate was a sprawling masterpiece of dark wood and white paper walls, surrounded by ancient pines that whispered in the wind. But as Joon-Hyuk stood on the veranda, his eyes scanning the pitch-black treeline, the silence didn't feel like peace. Felt like a held breath. Inside the villa, the twins were finally laughing, the sound echoing off the polished timber floors as Amara helped them settle into a room filled with plush toys and warm blankets. For a few hours, the dragon had allowed himself to believe that the war was a cold one, fought with bank accounts, legal injunctions, and boardroom coups. He had underestimated the desperation of a woman who had seen her entire future incinerated by a single no. He had forgotten that Yoon Seo-Yun didn't just want his status. She wanted his soul, and if she couldn't own it, she would ensure no one else could. The first sign of the nightmare was the smell. It didn't start with a roar, but with the sweet, sickening scent of accelerant drifting through the air filtration system. Joon-Hyuk's head snapped toward the vents, his instincts screaming. Then, the night was fractured by a series of muffled thuds, glass breaking against the stone foundation. Within seconds, the ancient, dried wood of the estate's exterior ignited with a ferocity that turned the dark mountainside into a pillar of orange fire. Amara, get the girls. Joon-Hyuk's voice tore through the house, more a roar than a command. He didn't wait for a response. He lunged into the hallway as the first wall of flame licked through the paper screens, the heat so intense it singed the hair on his arms. The fire was moving with unnatural speed, fueled by the chemical cocktails Seo-Yun's mercenaries had hurled against the structure. This wasn't an intimidation tactic. This was an extermination. He burst into the bedroom just as the ceiling began to groan. Amara was already awake, her body arched over Nia and Zuri like a human shield. The twins were wide-eyed, their small faces illuminated by the flickering, demonic light of the encroaching flames. The hallway behind them was already a tunnel of fire, the heat melting the lacquer off the doors. The back exit is blocked, Amara shouted over the sudden, deafening roar of the blaze. Joon-Hyuk, the windows are reinforced. We can't get through. Joon-Hyuk didn't waste breath on words. He grabbed a heavy oak chair and smashed it against the reinforced glass with the strength of a man who refused to let his family die twice. On the third strike, the glass spiderwebbed. On the fourth, it shattered. Outside, the night air rushed in, feeding the fire and causing a backdraft that sent a wave of heat rolling over them. He grabbed the twins, one under each arm, their small hands clutching his shirt in a silent, terrified grip. Amara, stay behind me. Hold my belt. Don't let go. They moved through the billowing black smoke, Joon-Hyuk using his own body to break through the falling debris. He felt the sting of embers against his neck and the searing pain of wood collapsing against his shoulder, but he didn't falter. Every step was a battle against the element of fire that Seo-Yun had chosen as her weapon. As they stumbled out onto the stone terrace, gasping for the freezing mountain air, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the pine trees. It was Seo-Yun. She was dressed in a black tactical jacket, a stark contrast to her usual high-fashion attire, and in her hand, she held a flare gun, its tip still smoking. Her face was a mask of beautiful, distorted madness, her eyes reflecting the inferno she had created. You said I'd be a queen of nothing, Joon-Hyuk, she shrieked, her voice barely audible over the crackling wood. But look at you. You're burning your own kingdom down for them. If they have your blood, then your blood belongs in the ash. Behind her, 3 of her remaining mercenaries emerged, their weapons raised. Joon-Hyuk set the twins down behind a stone pillar, shielding them with his bulk. He didn't look at the fire. He looked at Seo-Yun, his amber eyes turning into chips of cold, dark flint. You should have stayed in the city, Seo-Yun, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice terrifyingly steady despite the soot on his face. In the city there are witnesses. In the city there is the law. Up here, there is only the dragon. Kill them, Seo-Yun screamed, her finger tightening on the flare gun. Burn them all. The mercenaries moved, but they were exhausted and terrified, while Joon-Hyuk was fueled by a primal, fatherly rage that made him more than a man. He moved like a shadow through the smoke, his movements blurred by the heat haze. He didn't use a gun. He used his bare hands, his strikes landing with the finality of a sledgehammer. He disarmed the first man with a snap of a wrist, using the man's own body as a shield against the others. He was a whirlwind of violence in the center of a burning world. He felt a bullet graze his thigh, but he didn't stop. He reached the second mercenary, delivering a throat strike that silenced him forever, before spinning to kick the third man into the edge of the blazing porch. Seo-Yun backed away, her confidence evaporating as she watched her expensive protection dismantled in seconds. She raised the flare gun at Amara, but before she could pull the trigger, Joon-Hyuk was there. He didn't strike her. He simply grabbed the barrel of the gun and twisted it upward, the flare screaming into the night sky like a dying star. He gripped her by the throat, his hand a vice that cut off her breath. He looked into her eyes, the eyes of the woman who had tried to burn his children alive twice, and for a second, the darkness in him tempted him to let the fire have her. Joon-Hyuk, no! Amara's voice cut through the madness. She was standing by the stone pillar, holding Nia and Zuri. Don't let them see this. Don't let her take who you are. Joon-Hyuk looked at his daughters. They were watching him, their faces pale and streaked with soot, but they weren't looking at him with fear. They were looking at him as their savior. If he killed her now, in front of them, he would be giving Seo-Yun the ultimate victory. He would be proving that he was the monster she claimed he was. He shoved Seo-Yun away, sending her sprawling into the dirt. The police are already on their way, Seo-Yun. I tracked your signal the moment you left the city. This isn't a wedding and it isn't a funeral. It's your ending. The sound of sirens began to wail in the valley below, a chorus of justice rising through the pines. Joon-Hyuk didn't wait to watch her be shackled. He turned his back on the woman who had tried to destroy him and walked toward his family. The villa was a total loss, the roof collapsing in a shower of sparks that drifted toward the stars. But as Joon-Hyuk gathered Amara and the twins in his arms, standing in the cold mountain air as the heat of the fire warmed their backs, he knew it didn't matter. The wood and paper were gone, but the foundation, The blood that his mother had called dirty, and the love she had called weakness, was untouchable. He looked at Nia and Zuri, who were shivering in the night air. He took off his burnt overcoat and wrapped it around them, pulling them into his chest. "Is the house gone, Appa?" Nia asked, her voice small and weary. "The house is gone," Joon-Hyuk whispered, kissing her forehead. "But we aren't. And as long as we're together, we're home." He looked at Amara, her face lit by the dying embers of the estate. She reached out, her fingers tracing the burn on his shoulder, her eyes wet with tears. "You saved us again," she breathed. "I'll save you every day for the rest of my life," he promised. As the first fire trucks began to crest the hill, their red and blue lights dancing across the trees, Joon-Hyuk stood tall. He was the Dragon of Seoul, and he was covered in ash and blood. But as he felt the heartbeat of his daughters against his own, he realized that Seo-Yun's arson hadn't destroyed his legacy. It had purified it. The foreign blood had survived the fire, and from the ashes of the secondary estate, a new kingdom was rising, one built on a love that even the hottest flame could never consume. He turned toward the arriving officers, his jaw set, ready to finish the legal war he had started. The hunt was over, and the dragon was finally, truly, standing in the light. The smoke from the mountain estate had barely cleared when Kang Joon-Hyuk returned to his glass fortress in the heart of Seoul. He didn't look like a man who had just escaped an inferno. He looked like a god of war who had merely changed his armor. Dressed in a fresh charcoal suit that fit like a second skin, he sat in his high-backed leather chair, his fingers dancing across a transparent glass interface that glowed with the complex, pulsing heartbeat of the global markets. Behind him, the Han River flowed, dark and indifferent, but in front of him, the digital landscape was already beginning to bleed. He had spent years building the Kang conglomerate into a bastion of stability, but tonight, he was using its sheer mass as a wrecking ball. The target was the Yoon Group, Seo-Yun's family legacy, the source of her unearned arrogance, and the bankroll for her madness. He had warned her that he would take everything, and in the world of Kang Joon-Hyuk, a warning was as good as a finalized contract. "Min-ho," Joon-Hyuk said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly calm register. "Initiate the Black Lotus Protocol. I want every short sell order we've staged over the last 6 months executed simultaneously. I don't want a dip in their stock. I want a crater." Min-ho, standing at the edge of the desk with a tablet of his own, nodded sharply. "Sir, the institutional investors are already panicking. The news of the fire at the secondary estate hasn't hit the press yet, but the rumors of Seo-Yun's involvement in a criminal dispute are leaking through our channels. The Yoon Group's credit rating is being downgraded as we speak." "Good," Joon-Hyuk murmured, his eyes reflecting the rapid-fire data streams. "But don't just break them. I want to own them. Every subsidiary, every shipping lane, every patent. I want Seo-Yun to wake up in a world where she can't even afford the air she breathes without my permission." The financial siege was a masterpiece of cold, calculated brutality. Joon-Hyuk didn't just throw money at the problem. He exploited the fractures he had spent half a decade studying. He knew the Yoon Group's offshore holdings were over-leveraged, and he knew their board of directors was composed of cowards who valued their personal portfolios over family loyalty. One by one, he called the major stakeholders. His pitch was simple. "Sell to me at 40 cents on the dollar, or stay on the ship while I sink it." By noon, the Yoon Group's headquarters was in a state of total collapse. The stock was in a freefall, suspended twice by the exchange to prevent a total market contagion. But Joon-Hyuk was relentless. He authorized his private equity firms to sweep up the remaining shares, moving with a speed that left the Yoon family lawyers paralyzed. He wasn't just buying a company. He was erasing a name. As the afternoon sun hit the glass of his office, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. He had acquired a 51% controlling interest in the Yoon Group's parent company. With a single keystroke, he fired the entire executive board, including Seo-Yun's father. But he wasn't done. The real killshot was yet to come. "Sir," Min-ho reported, a grim smile touching his lips, "the forensic accountants have finished the audit of the arson funds. We have the direct digital trail. Seo-Yun used a shell company under the Yoon Group's discretionary marketing budget to pay the mercenaries. She didn't just commit a crime. She used her father's company to finance an attempted triple homicide. The police are downstairs. Joon-Hyuk leaned back, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He looked at the twins, who were playing quietly in the corner of his office with Amara, oblivious to the fact that their father had just dismantled an empire to ensure their safety. Nia was building a tower of gold-plated blocks, while Zuri was drawing a picture of a large, black dragon guarding a small house. He stood up and walked toward the windows, watching as a fleet of police cruisers with flashing lights surrounded the Yoon Group's corporate tower across the city. He could almost feel Seo-Yun's terror from here. She would be led out in handcuffs, the red coat of her former status replaced by the cold reality of a prison jumpsuit. She would have no lawyers to defend her, no family to bail her out, and no fortune to buy her way to freedom. Every cent she had once called hers was now flowing into a trust fund for Nia and Zuri. Amara walked up behind him, her hand sliding into his. She looked at the chaos unfolding in the distance and then at the man beside her. "You really did it," she whispered. "You didn't just protect us. You took away their power to ever hurt anyone again." "I told you," Joon-Hyuk said, turning to her, his gaze softening. "In this city, my blood is the law, and no one threatens my family and gets to keep their kingdom." He pulled her into his arms, the scent of her jasmine perfume grounding him after the coldness of the financial war. He felt the weight of his own billions, untouched, secure, and now vastly increased by the ruins of his enemies. But the money felt different now. It wasn't a score to be kept or a weapon to be feared. It was a wall he had built around the people he loved. "What about your mother?" Amara asked, her voice tinged with concern. The Yoon Group was her biggest ally. "She's isolated now." "My mother is a relic of a dying age," Joon-Hyuk said. "She's sitting in her mansion right now, watching the news, realizing that the foreign blood she tried to erase is now the only thing holding the Kang name together. She's lost her allies, her daughter-in-law-elect, and her son. She can keep her house and her pure history, but she will never see my daughters again." He looked back at the twins. Nia had finished her tower and was now helping Zuri color the dragon. He saw the future in their laughter. A future where they would never know the sting of being called dirty, and where they would never have to run from the shadows. The financial siege was over. The Yoon Group was a ghost, Seo-Yun was a prisoner, and the dragon was the master of all he surveyed. But as Joon-Hyuk knelt down on the carpet to help Nia with her gold blocks, he realized that his greatest victory wasn't the billions he had retained or the enemies he had crushed. It was the fact that, for the first time in his life, he didn't have to be a ghost. He was a father, a husband, and a man who had finally found a kingdom worth keeping. "Appa," Zuri said, handing him a purple crayon. "The dragon needs a friend. Can you draw a mommy dragon?" Joon-Hyuk took the crayon, his hand, the same hand that had just signed the death warrant of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, moving with a gentle, focused precision. "Of course, Zuri. The dragon is never going to be alone again." As the sun set over Seoul, casting long, golden shadows across his office, Kang Joon-Hyuk felt a peace he hadn't known in 35 years. The war was won, the siege was over, and the dragon was home. He looked at Amara, then at his daughters, and knew that no matter what challenges the future held, they were no longer a matter of circumstance. They were a family, forged in fire, protected by gold, and bound by a blood that was, in every way that mattered, absolute. The silence in the grand ancestral hall of the Kang estate was not peaceful. It was a heavy, suffocating weight, the kind that preceded a final collapse. For centuries, this room had been the heart of the family's power, decorated with priceless ink paintings and Joseon-era ceramics that whispered of a purity maintained through ruthless selection. Today, however, the air was sharp with the scent of rain and the faint, lingering metallic tang of a world that was rapidly changing. Kang Joon-Hyuk stood in the center of the polished wood floor, his shadow stretching long and dark toward the dais where his mother sat. Madame Kang Sun-hee looked diminished. The news of Seo-Yun's arrest and the systematic dismemberment of the Yoon Group had stripped her of her most potent weapons, yet she sat with her spine as straight as a blade, her hands clutching the jade head of her walking stick. She didn't look at Joon-Hyuk with a mother's warmth. She looked at him as if he were a masterpiece she had painted, only to watch the ink run and ruin the canvas. "You have burned down the neighbor's house to keep yours warm, Joon-Hyuk," she said, her voice a brittle rasp that echoed off the high rafters. "You have disgraced this name. You have invited the eyes of the police and the commoners into our private business. And for what? For a ghost from your past and 2 children who carry the dust of another world in their veins." Joon-Hyuk didn't move. He stood with his hands behind his back, the posture of a sovereign who had already decided the fate of a conquered territory. "The dust you speak of, mother, is the only thing in this house that isn't rotting. You talk about disgrace? Disgrace is sending men to burn a bakery while 2 innocent children sleep inside. Disgrace is calling your own grandchildren contamination, because their mother had the courage to live a life you couldn't control. They are not my grandchildren," Madame Kang shrieked, the sound cracking her aristocratic mask. She stood up, her legs trembling with age and fury. "Look at them. Their skin, their hair, the way they speak. They are a visual mockery of everything the Kang family has stood for. We are the gold of this nation, Joon-Hyuk. We are the foundation. You have introduced a flaw into the casting. You have polluted the well." Joon-Hyuk took a step forward, his heavy boots sounding like the tolling of a funeral bell on the ancient floorboards. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The sheer mass of his presence, the weight of the dragon that he had finally fully embraced, filled the room until the air itself felt pressurized. "The well was already poisoned, mother," he said, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "It was poisoned by your greed and your obsession with a purity that never existed. You talk about gold? You are nothing but lead painted over with a thin layer of prestige. I spent 35 years trying to be the son you wanted. I killed for this name. I lied for this name. I lived in the shadows so you could sit in the light of your pure legacy. And what did it get me? A hollow chest and a life that felt like a slow-motion suicide." He paused, a cold, mocking smile touching his lips. "And then I saw them. I saw Nia and Zuri. I saw the way they looked at me, not as a bank account, not as a political merger, and not as a tool for a legacy. They looked at me as a father. They have the foreign blood you hate so much, yes. They have the warmth of the sun and the strength of a woman who survived everything you threw at her. And in their eyes, I saw something I haven't seen in this house for 3 generations. And what is that?" Madame Kang sneered. "Weakness? Sentimentality? Life," Joon-Hyuk whispered. "I saw a lineage worth saving. For centuries, the Kangs have been breeding for power, for money, for status. We became predators who eat our own young to maintain a seat at the table. But those girls, they have a light that your purity could never produce. They are the only part of me that is actually good. They are the only part of this bloodline that deserves to survive into the next century." He walked closer until he was standing at the base of the dais, looking up at the woman who had birthed him but never knew him. "You called them a mistake, but they are my redemption. The foreign blood in their veins is the only thing that has purified the Kang name. It took a woman from another world to bring a soul back into this family. Every drop of their blood is a rebuke to your arrogance. Every laugh they share is a victory over your coldness." Madame Kang's hand shook as she pointed her stick at him. "You are delusional. The world will never accept them. The board, the families, the society you live in, they will see them as an asterisk, a footnote, a stain. Let them look," Joon-Hyuk countered, his amber eyes glowing with a terrifying, predatory certainty. "Let them whisper. I have bought the companies they work for. I have built the banks that hold their fortunes. I am the Dragon of Seoul, mother. I don't ask for acceptance. I dictate reality. If anyone in this city so much as looks at my daughters with a hint of the disdain you carry, I will ruin them so thoroughly that their names will be forgotten by the next sunrise." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "I am stripping you of your title, mother. I have already filed the paperwork to move the family seat to the penthouse. You can stay here in this museum of dead things. You can talk to the paintings and the pots about your pure blood until the walls crumble. But you will never see Nia or Zuri again. You will never hear their names spoken in your presence. To them, you don't exist. You are a ghost I have exorcised from their future. Joon-Hyuk, you can't do this, she gasped, her face turning a sickly gray. I am your mother. I am the Kang Sun-hee. You were, Joon-Hyuk said, turning his back on her. But the dragon has no mother. The dragon has a family. And today, for the first time in my life, I am going home. He walked toward the massive double doors of the hall. As he reached the threshold, he stopped and looked back one last time. The grand hall, which had once felt like an insurmountable mountain, now looked like a small, dusty box. His mother stood in the center of it, a frail, angry woman clutching a piece of jade as if it could save her from the truth. One more thing, mother, Joon-Hyuk said, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. When I look at my daughters, I don't see foreign blood. I see the best of me and the best of the woman I love. I see a lineage that is finally, for the first time, actually worthy of the crown I wear. You didn't lose a son today. You lost the only thing that made your life meaningful. You lost the future. He pushed the doors open, stepping out into the crisp evening air. His armored SUV was waiting, the engine purring like a satisfied beast. Through the tinted glass, he could see the silhouettes of Nia and Zuri, their small hands pressed against the window as they watched for him. Beside them, Amara sat, her eyes meeting his with a silent, unwavering support. As he climbed into the back seat, the door sealing out the cold and the echoes of the past, Nia threw herself into his arms. Did you finish your work, Appa? She asked, her voice bright and untainted by the venom of the room he had just left. I did, Nia, Joon-Hyuk said, pulling her and Zuri into his lap. He looked at Amara and smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. The work is done. The dragon is finished with the shadows. Where are we going now? Zuri asked, clutching his thumb with her tiny, strong fingers. Joon-Hyuk looked out at the city of Seoul, the neon lights beginning to flicker to life like 1,000 stars. He felt the heartbeat of his daughters against his chest, the foreign blood that was now the most precious thing in his world. He realized that the confrontation hadn't been about a company or a name. It had been about choosing between a legacy of stone and a legacy of breath. We're going home, he said, his voice firm and filled with a peace he had never known. We're going to build a new kingdom, one where the only thing that matters is how much we love each other. As the SUV pulled away from the estate, leaving the pure history of the Kangs behind in the darkness, Kang Joon-Hyuk leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The financial siege was won. The arsonist was in a cell. The mother was a memory. And the dragon was finally, truly standing in the light of his own creation. The lineage was saved, not by gold or steel, but by the two little girls who had dared to call a monster daddy and made him a king. The transition from a life of calculated shadows to one of illuminated warmth had taken 6 months of tectonic shifts. But as Kang Joon-Hyuk sat at the head of the long, reclaimed oak table in his new estate, the silence was finally a peaceful one. The penthouse had served its purpose as a fortress, but this home, a sprawling, modern architectural marvel nestled in the quiet hills of Songbukdong, was a sanctuary. Gone were the reinforced paper walls of the past and the cold glass of the corporate sky. Here, the floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a private forest where the cherry blossoms were just beginning to drift like pink snow, and the only cleaners on the property were the discreet staff who moved with the quiet efficiency of ghosts, ensuring the dragon's peace was never disturbed. Joon-Hyuk leaned back in his chair, his tailored shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the tattoos on his forearms. Marks of a past he no longer hid, but wore as a map of the distance he had traveled. Across from him sat Amara. She was radiant, the haunted hollows of her cheeks replaced by a healthy glow, her dark skin luminous under the soft amber light of the chandelier. She was no longer the fleeing secretary or the hidden baker. She was the co-chair of the Amarakong Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar initiative they had launched to protect and educate children who, like Nia and Zuri, had been told they didn't belong. She wore a simple silk dress the color of deep emerald, and when she caught his eye, the smile she gave him was devoid of the fear that had once defined their every interaction. Between them, the reason for every war Joon-Hyuk had fought sat perched on their chairs, their feet dangling inches above the floor. Nia and Zuri were no longer the shivering shadows from the rainy cafe. Their cornrows were perfectly tight, adorned with small gold beads that caught the light, and their laughter was the dominant sound in the room. They were healthy, vibrant, and possessed a terrifyingly sharp intelligence that Joon-Hyuk recognized as his own. They were no longer running from the bad lady or whispers of dirty blood. In the 6 months since the fall of the Yoon Group and the exile of Madame Kang, the twins had become the most protected, and perhaps most whispered about, children in Asia, the heirs to an empire that had been rebuilt in their image. "Appa, look," Zuri chirped, holding up a piece of steamed snapper with her chopsticks with a precision that would have made a sniper proud. "I did it without dropping it. Does this mean I can start the martial arts training tomorrow?" Joon-Hyuk felt a pull in his chest, a sensation he now recognized as pure, unadulterated pride. "The deal was when you reached 5.5 and could show focus at the table," he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. "And since you've been practicing your forms in the garden when you thought I wasn't looking, I suppose we can begin. But remember, the dragon's strength isn't in the strike, it's in the restraint." Nia giggled, reaching for a bowl of seasoned vegetables. "She just wants to be able to kick the practice dummies, Appa. I want to learn how the computers work. Minho showed me the security screens today. I saw the drones." Amara shared a knowing look with Joon-Hyuk. "We've created monsters," she joked softly, though her eyes were shining. "No," Joon-Hyuk replied, his gaze dropping to his daughters. "We've created Kangs. They're just finally standing in the light where they belong." The new empire Joon-Hyuk had built over the last half-year was a marvel of strategic ruthlessness and defensive depth. He had successfully absorbed the viable remnants of the Yoon Group, purging the corruption and installing a new generation of leadership loyal only to him. His mother remained in the ancestral estate, a prisoner of her own outdated ideologies, her influence zero, her bank accounts monitored, and her name scrubbed from the daily operations of the world she once ruled. He had effectively decapitated the old guard of Seoul's elite, replacing the purity of lineage with a meritocracy backed by his own absolute power. He was more powerful than he had ever been, not because he had more money, though he did, but because he finally had a why behind the how. As the dinner progressed, the conversation drifted from school projects to the Foundation's upcoming gala. The dragon was no longer a beast to be feared by the innocent. He had become a guardian. The city still whispered his name in hushed tones, and the underworld still trembled at the mention of his shadow. But within the walls of this home, he was simply Appa. He was the man who checked for monsters under the bed, the man who walked them to the gate every morning, and the man who held Amara until she fell asleep, ensuring the nightmares of the fire never returned. After the twins had finished their meal and were whisked away by their nanny for a final hour of play before bed, Joon-Hyuk stood and walked to the veranda, Amara trailing close behind. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant, hummed melody of the city. He looked out at the lights of Seoul, realizing that 6 months ago, he had been ready to burn it all down. Now he was the one keeping it steady. Amara leaned against the railing beside him, her shoulder touching his. "Sometimes I still wake up and expect to be back in that small apartment above the bakery," she whispered, waiting for the sound of boots on the stairs, expecting the rain to start falling through the roof. Joon-Hyuk turned to her, his hand reaching out to cup her face. The calluses on his palms were a reminder of the violence he was capable of, but his touch was as light as a feather. "The rain stopped the day you found me, Amara. The house is solid. The walls are high, and the man standing next to you is never going to let the shadows back in." "I know," she said, leaning into his touch. "I see it every time you look at the girls. You didn't just give them a name, Joon-Hyuk. You gave them a world." "They gave me a life," he countered. He looked back into the warm, yellow light of the dining room. He saw the 2 empty chairs where his daughters had just been, and he saw the shredded remnants of the life he used to lead scattered in the winds of the past. He had started this journey as a man of stone, a dragon, who lived for nothing but the preservation of a cold legacy. He ended it as a man of blood and bone, a father who had realized that true power wasn't found in the fear of others, but in the love of his own. The hunt was over. The financial wars were won. The stalkers were in cells, and the matriarch was a ghost. As Joon-Hyuk pulled Amara closer, watching the moon rise over his kingdom, he realized that the foreign blood in his daughters hadn't just saved his lineage. It had redeemed his soul. He was Kang Joon-Hyuk, the Dragon of Seoul, and for the first time in his life he wasn't just ruling. He was home. "Shall we go check on them?" Amara asked, her voice a soft invitation to the only reality that mattered. Joon-Hyuk nodded, the amber in his eyes glowing with a quiet, contented fire. "Let's go see our future." As they walked back inside, the glass doors sliding shut with a final, heavy click, the lights of the estate stayed bright against the darkness of the mountain. The new empire was not built on a foundation of purity, but on a foundation of choice, loyalty, and a love that had survived the flames. The dragon was no longer alone in his lair. He was the head of a family, the protector of a dream, and a man who finally knew that the greatest victory wasn't in the fight, but in the peace that followed. The story that had begun with a desperate plea in a rainy cafe had ended here, in the golden light of a home that no one, not even the gods of the old world, would ever dare to touch. Before the screen goes dark, I want to say a massive thank you to every single one of you for riding with the dragon today. This story is just getting started, and the stakes are about to get even higher. If you haven't done it yet, please drop a comment right now and tell me your city and your country. I'm reading every single one of them, and I'm honestly blown away by how far this chronicle has traveled. Now listen closely. The dragon has awakened, but his enemies are regrouping. If you don't want to miss the absolute chaos of part 2, where Joon-Hyuk takes the fight directly to his mother's front door, you need to hit that like button and subscribe right now. Turn on those notifications because you do not want to be late when the next chapter drops. The hunt is over, but the war has just begun. I'll see you in the comments, and I'll see you very soon for part 2. Stay bold.